Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt. These are the 4 presidents that represent Mount Rushmore, a shrine to democracy and to our nation, and represents the following values that we Americans hold dear until recently in the last 6 months: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, tolerance and social justice, to be free and happy, and finally, economic freedom from trust and monopolies, and also environmental conservation. But these values have already been thrown away in the last 6 months due to COVID-19 and to the resulting lockdowns. Why am I here at Mount Rushmore, at Block Hills? Because I want to see this monument. I want to see this monument for myself before the country falls apart. And it already is, for all intents and purposes, falling apart. I could have been halfway towards my IT degree for a better job. Could have gone to a Hatsune Miku concert. Could have gone to Oricon 2020. Could have gone to New York for my annual Memorial Day trip. Could have gone to the Kennedy Center for opera. Could have gone to my local library for a weekly visit. My mom could have slowly started her own transportation business, and I will not be able to worry about her making ends meet. She would have been fine. But all this has been stolen from me. Spring, summer, fall, and now winter's going to be stolen from me and everyone else in my country, especially where I live in the DC metropolitan area. This whole country, my country, has turned into a real-life dystopian young adult novel. The only difference is that there is no young rebellious hero coming to save us. Because all the heroes are virtue selling how much they're saving lives by ordering Uber Eats and playing video games. While this country is falling apart and collapsing socio-economically to the point that I cannot recognize my own city or my own country. When COVID-19 was on the news and the debate over lockdown started, I initially agreed with a 2-week lockdown. I thought to myself, 2 weeks to spare us 2 years or more of economic and social pain. 2 weeks turned to 1 month, and then another month, and then when the phase reopenings were announced by various state governors, by almost every state governor, it was revealed that the end game for them is that they have no real intention of reopening until they get a vaccine or a bailout from the feds. Why a vaccine? Because almost all state governors and mayors have collectively overreacted by locking down the entire populations for a pandemic that mostly affects the elderly, the already sick, and those with certain pre-existing conditions, and exploiting this pandemic for ulterior political motives at almost every resident's expense. These lockdowns are now prolonged to a point where it's causing irreparable damage to our social and economic fabric. Small business owners, 40% of them in the U.S. are gone. Their livelihoods went up in smoke. Their dreams gone because of the prolonged lockdowns, especially the restaurant business. Especially in New York and San Francisco. Almost half of small businesses are now gone, disappeared. Due to the fact that they're overwhelmingly focused on public health, they have forgot about their own economy. And their tax coffers as well. New York City is practically dead. San Francisco, as we know it, is gone. Chicago, in the magnificent Mao, is partially decimated, abandoned, because their leaders, the state governors and mayors, want to look tough on COVID at everything else. Suicides, drug overdoses, alcoholism deaths, deaths of despair has skyrocketed, and governors and mayors don't care because it's not COVID. But of course, no one cares about real issues anymore. just political tribalism. Because when you take away the quality of life, virtualize every aspect of daily life to make it unpalatable and dystopian, all there's left is work and politics. Of course, cable news outlets such as CNN and MSNBC didn't tell you, because they realized they got a captive audience of people staying home. So they exploit it by pumping endless amounts of fear porn, hysteria, alarmism, and outright yellow journalism instead of timely, factual journalism. Because since 2016, American journalism died and replaced with political partisan journalism and opinion-based news. This fear-based and politicized journalism has turned people deranged, hysterical, and left them unable to think for themselves anymore. To the point where nothing matters to most people except COVID and nothing else. Why hasn't it happened? Because state governors, in their fear and panic, did not make a cost-benefit analysis on implementing lockdowns. They never did. Instead of doing a cost-benefit analysis, whether these lockdowns will actually work, will actually be beneficial, what they did instead was cargo culting. Cargo cults. They cargo culted China, when in reality, in China, they perform local lockdowns. And when New Zealand implemented lockdowns, which is easy since it's an island, almost everyone and their governors and their mayors basically ignored deaths and hospitalizations and went straight to no cases ever or until a vaccine in their veins. Despite overwhelming evidence from the CDC that the pandemic, as soon as they went for the vulnerable population, it basically burned itself out. In New York and in California, Andrew Cuomo and Gavin Newsom, respectively, went more politically deranged, hysterical, and performed virtue signaling and science signaling about how tough they are about COVID. Tied to the fact that their actions, their executive orders, have caused the elder side, the elder side of tens of thousands of people. To hide the fact that their actions, their orders have caused the mass murder, the elder side of tens of thousands of people in nursing homes, instead of accepting help from the federal government. That's not the worst part. While people with virtue saying about saving grandma and grandpa, the elderly are always suffering even if they do not have COVID. Many people with dementia are suffering without dignity because the COVID-19 prevention plans do not allow any visitors, and many of them are dying of loneliness for being trapped in their rooms for months now. But no one really cares. What about the nurses and doctors that were heralded as heroes in the fight against COVID? Those dollars that we clap for every night in the initial months of the outbreak. Now they laid off because they overwhelmingly focused on COVID. And now they could not get any money from elective surgery since they had this laser focus on COVID. Where's the support for layoff nurses and doctors in hospitals? Where are they? This laser focus on COVID has caused the slow economic collapse of our economy. Most of it is partly self-inflicted. Mass unemployment, mass homelessness, people unable to get proper medical treatment such as cancer or elected but not needed surgery. And people unable to get proper medical treatment such as cancer or elected but needed surgery. Virtual learning causing people who used to succeed in school either failing or not getting the same education as they get in person and dropping out of school. And when the protest, civil unrest, and violence came, it accelerated the crisis. So many small businesses and people fear getting arrested or sometimes being beaten up by violent protesters that took advantage of the protests of the BLM movement. In all, we have traded our economic, social, and political freedoms for a little more public health, and a little more public hygiene. In the end, we gained neither. And almost all mayors, governors have took advantage of it, and virtue signaled and science signaled their way to look tough on COVID, while destroying their own cities. Almost everyone in America have embraced dystopia with open arms, and no one wants to question it. With everything taken away, there's only one acceptable legal action: politics. This is why BLM protests were ongoing, and why the civil unrest have been going on for at least 100 days, despite clear evidence of gathering sizes outside. Various state governors and mayors allow this to happen because they don't want to look racist if they try to stop them or tell them to stop them, or tell law firms to stop them, because while we're in a pandemic, they allow this as a distraction while virtue signaling how systematic racism is, while ignoring this systematic racism in these lockdowns, because Black Americans, Hispanics, and undocumented migrants, and the homeless, and disabled persons like me are disproportionately affected by these lockdowns. Disproportionately. And no one in the news media or in the government actually cares anymore, because all they care is COVID.
Keep America great again.
Word. And the worst part, as soon as they get their vaccine or bailout, they'll try and avoid responsibility or the social and economic injury as much as possible. They'll avoid taking any responsibility. They're just going to pretend that all this didn't happen. American society will be paying for these lockdowns for the rest of their lives, for at least 50 years. Because that's how society has been pushed backwards by these lockdowns. While politicians will do nothing and will never be held accountable for a virus that mostly killed the elderly. Out of the over 200,000 deaths in society due to COVID-19, 75% of them were the elderly. 75% of them. While the remaining 25% of them were basically under 70, or mostly the youth, which is very small in comparison to the elderly died, which is mostly preventable if some of those state governments actually set up the help from the federal government, which they didn't. So they can shift the blame towards the feds for not doing enough. When these lockdowns started, I thought to myself, 2 weeks of lockdown to spare 2 years or more pain. So I just accepted it, just to save the vulnerable, just to get hospitals prepared. But those 2 weeks became 2 months, and then another month, until almost all state governors have their prolonged lockdowns/openings, which made sure that any economic recovery would be impossible. Any social recovery would be impossible. And for all intents and purposes, my country would no longer be recognizable, because almost every state governor won't reopen their economies or get back to our normal lives until a vaccine is ready, which will take years. Instead, they're trying to sell us into this new normal, this dystopian normal that most Americans don't want. You know what this new dystopian normal is? 40% of our small businesses decimated, and they'll never come back. Children, they're used to in-person schooling, are now forced into virtual learning, where in most cases that virtual learning is either poor or sometimes non-existent. In many cases, teachers oftentimes get paid to do nothing while offering similar learning experiences that are not too poor. And as a result, most children either don't pay attention or they simply drop out of school. And already we got multiple dropouts, huge number of dropouts in places where children are supposed to be at school. These lockdowns have caused these lockdowns also caused an employment crisis. Not like the Great Depression. When I mean the Great Depression, I mean 25% unemployment. And the worst part is that whole industries, like the arts and cultures industries, live events, conventions, music industry, they're either decimated or they're on the brink of decimation. And most of these workers who want to go back to work, who want to provide their families, cannot speak out because of the fear and hysteria and the groupthink this has caused. So many people cannot think for themselves. They cannot feel for themselves. They cannot do anything because they've been so indoctrinated by fear porn. Fear porn by the media, especially on cable news and on social media. When a state locks down their economy and basically only allows people to stay at home or at work with nothing to look forward to other than politics, this is the end result. When you have nothing to look forward to except politics, people turn to tribalism, especially political tribalism. A house divided cannot stand, and a divided house will collapse. So when these lockdowns started, we stayed home, and the elderly died anyway, due to neglect from nursing homes, or in some cases state governors such as Andrew Cuomo and Governor Gavin Newsom from New York and California respectively, or nursing homes to accept COVID-19 patients into their places, causing the deaths of tens of thousands. Tens of thousands of deaths could have been easily avoidable if they weren't that politically deranged and hysterical. And instead of state governments and state legislators holding them accountable, they willfully enable them. And state governments are too busy pleasing the Twitter user base or looking good in social media or in the news or news channels. Waiting for a vaccine will not restore the damage done to the economy and to our livelihoods. Some people during the pandemic and lockdowns have not only lost everything, but every means to bounce back from this. We trade liberty for temporary hygiene, security, and public health, and we receive neither. The best way to understand the mindset of a hysterical American on the internet during COVID-19 lockdowns, in order to understand the mindset of a person induced with hysteria from the mainstream media and the COVID-19 lockdowns on the internet, I found this statement from YouTuber Tech History to be fitting. I paraphrase it to make more sense. Anything that does not fit the view that lockdowns work get rejected, destroyed, or ignored. And anyone that insists is a Trump sympathizer, even he or she didn't vote for Trump or in any election. Thus justifying calling them flat earther, Nazi, you're an idiot, grandma killer, and telling them to off themselves or neck themselves. Forget reasonable discourse or the scientific method. Forget the idea of discussion or thinking. Forget freedom of speech. Forget basic law and order. Forget the rule of law, forget rule of law and justice, forget basic law and order or rule of law, forget the very theory of history itself or science, forget reasonable discourse or the scientific method, forget the idea of discussion or thinking, forget freedom of speech, and forget the very theory of history itself, and forget basic law and order or rule of law. Just bow down to pure ideology, political tribalism, and social media totalitarianism, and take it. That's why most people who are aware of this crisis, aware of these lockdowns, massive damage to our society, dare not say anything. Because they will be ridiculed and harassed by the unconscious mob that's highly indoctrinated by mass media and social media. Not because they're wrong, but because they will be attacking their hysterical mentality and derangement. 200,000 people died from COVID-19. Mostly the elderly. And state governors and society sacrificed the youth and society's livelihoods for a disease that is actually slightly worse than the flu. In World War II, 400,000 people died. Many of them who fought a war against an actual regime that was threatening our country and the world in peace and stability. There's some things worth living and dying for. A post-COVID-19 dystopia isn't one of them, and shouldn't be one of them.
Oh, beautiful, our heroes proved in liberating strife. Who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, make God thy gold refined, till all success be nobleness, and
All Americans who have been affected by these lockdowns need to speak up now. Speak up, or you lose everything you know and love. And you lose everything you know and love. That makes life worth it. That makes life worth living.
Purple mountain majesties, over the fruited plain. But now wait a minute, I'm talking about America, sweet America. You know, God done shed his grace on thee. He crowned our good. Yes, he did. Heavy brotherhood from sea to shining sea. You know, I wish I had somebody to help me sing this. You see,